Yes, this is actually the receipt for the payment. Is it? Okay. Yes. Your name is again? Sabrina. So nothing there. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Payment. So it's for 4 of you, yes. 4 of you.
Everybody's happy,
This is the receipt.
Morning, Tamar. You look refreshed. You look refreshed, yes.
Morning.
Austria.
From Austria.
Oh, I see. You went up there, yeah.
This is the receipt for your payment.
Okay.
And this is your name tag. You have to get it from there. Hello. Also Austria. Gender. This is the receipt for your payment. Okay.
So it's the owner of that newspaper who writes, who decides that
So that you're getting 50% of your income from journalism. Yes.
More help. Some of them, as one of them told me when I testified, that these are the professionals. So, yes, for some. Now, some of them really, but some of them, when they are now more than 80 years old,
I'm doing the welcome.
I welcome him. He's wonderful. He gets younger. You see, he's the best ambassador of Israel. He answers questions.
לא שומע. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning.
Very good morning.
Although we're in the Middle East, we'll try to be punctual as much as we can over the next couple of days. Try to beat that reputation once and for all. It's wonderful to welcome you all to this 15th annual conference of the AIPCE. I hope the weather we've arranged for you is to your liking. And before we get underway, just a few points of order. Please try to remember to wear your name tag at all times. It will help our dedicated production team here. And in case some of you haven't noticed, in the back pocket of this, you'll find a program. There's a program of the conference. That's smart, isn't it? Yeah. Right, okay. So that's handy, you don't have to carry those A4 forms. In the front pocket of the tablet case you've all received, you will find a memory stick in case you haven't yet. You call it a memory stick. I know in Europe, the Israeli guy who invented this beautiful gizmo calls this disc on key. In it you will find all the country reports, as well as the selected literature from our kind sponsors, the Israel Democracy Institute, the New Israel Fund, and the School of Communications at AIPCE2013. I reckon there's one tree somewhere in the world which owes its life to us today, not printing all those country reports this year. Now, Caesarea this evening is a good 40-minute drive along the coast, but they've been working on the highway, so the bus has to leave at 6 p.m. sharp this evening at the front of the hotel. We don't want to leave anybody behind, but we want to get there in time for the sunset, which you will all appreciate. Is there anyone who's not planning to join us? I can't imagine why. I suspect everybody will be coming. Now, I have 48 people registered for the Jerusalem tour on Thursday. Please tell us by this evening, you can tell Liat and her production team, if you would like to be dropped off at the airport on our way back from Jerusalem. We should be at Terminal 3, if we do, at around 5:30 p.m. So anybody who's got evening, early, mid-evening flights, I would recommend to take this. It'll save you the hassle of getting back from central Tel Aviv. Now, those who do want to use this option will have to be checked out of the hotel with their luggage in the lobby by 7:45 in the morning. We have to leave here at 8 to beat the traffic to Jerusalem. They're also working on the highway to Jerusalem. That's a major headache. A group photo will be taken today just after the first session before we take our first coffee break, we'll take it just below this level outside. The production team will guide you there. We'll get it out of the way and move on with our lives. Some of you may have heard this anecdote. It's an old one about Conrad Hilton, the founder of this incredible hotel chain, who was on the Johnny Carson show way back in the 60s. And he was telling Johnny Carson his miraculous story about how he made it great in the American system. And at the end of the interview, Johnny Carson said, "Mr. Hilton, if you had just one thing to say to the American people, what would it be?" So Hilton looked at the camera and said, "Put the curtain inside the bathtub." If I can say just one thing to you today is the beach is off limits during session hours. And on a less funny note, the Eastern Mediterranean is rough even beyond what the newspapers have been telling you these past few weeks. We have had many fatal cases of drowning this summer, so please do take care. And final point, we've arranged this conference a bit slightly differently from previous ones, in the sense that it's going to be panel-based. But it doesn't mean that those of us sitting down there are not required to join in. And please feel free to interject with cases that you think will be of interest to all of us and are relevant to the subjects under discussion. Now let's get underway. We are honored to have with us today as keynote speaker Lord Hunt, the chairman of the UK Press Complaints Commission. He's a man who has been at the vanguard of an epic battle to keep legislators away from the business of press regulation. Lord Hunt, the Vice President of the Holocaust Educational Trust in Britain, has served in key cabinet posts in the Thatcher and Major governments between 1990 and 1995. It would be fair to assume that Lord Hunt needed to fall back on his formidable experience in British politics to salvage the reputation of a press regulator that at some stage, a couple of years ago, seemed to be public enemy number one. Lord Hunt was appointed to head the PCC in October 2011 and recommended, a mere 2 months later, replacing the mortally wounded regulator with a new system. He has been at ground zero of the tug of war between government, opposition, and victims of press excesses for many months. We will all be keen to hear his assessment of what the future model of press regulation will be in his country, with possible ramifications for us all. I am sure some of us will want to ask Lord Hunt questions, so may I suggest that the moderator of the first session leave some time for that at the end of the debate. Lord Hunt, the floor is yours.
Secretary General, thank you very much for those warm words. I'm just a little nervous because your introduction is way ahead of anything which I might now contribute. It's brought back many memories. President, delighted to be here and to be asked to come to the Association of European Press Councils. What I would just say is, first of all, I'm sorry I wasn't able to be here last night, but the President of Israel, I've already heard his words of advice and the way in which he answered questions, setting a very good example for the rest of us. And also, of course, another opportunity to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Israel Press Council. Now, where do I start? Of course, I've had a very full report from Catherine Speller, Bob Pinker, and others who've treasured having attended meetings of the Alliance before. And they have also, of course, prepared a report, which is available on that wonderful little instrument. It reminds me of my last visit to Israel, when I was Cabinet Minister for Science. And I attended Israel to see the incubator units of brilliant young scientists who were slowly researching new methods. And I had just launched with Sir Tim Berners-Lee, then just young Tim Berners-Lee, a young Cambridge graduate, at CERN, which is the site of the Large Hadron Collider. I had just launched with Tim Berners-Lee something called the World Wide Web. And it just reminded me that the one thing you can't do is to predict what the future holds. Because neither Tim Berners-Lee nor I, way back in '93, had any idea what a revolution was about to occur on the internet. And it is a sad reflection of our time that often we spend a huge amount of our industry researching the present and the past, and too little thinking about the future. And that leads me swiftly into what has been happening in the UK. In the UK, we have had a crisis confronting the media, which I'll just explain for a few moments. Also, perhaps owning up to the fact that I have spent most of my life fighting parliamentary attempts to control or regulate the press. And in 1990, when I was in Margaret Thatcher's cabinet, we set up a commission to look into the press at a time of huge controversy over the invasion of the privacy of Princess Diana and Prince Charles and members of the royal family. And Sir David Calcutt then produced a report after 2 years. By this time, Margaret Thatcher had ceased and John Major had begun, and we received that report, which in effect said that there had to be a new body controlling the regulation, self-regulation of the press in an independent way. And the press then abolished the Press Council in the UK and created the Press Complaints Commission. Then, in John Major's cabinet, Sir David Calcutt, after a year and a few months, decided that the press had failed in setting up the Press Complaints Commission, and really Parliament now had to accept the baton and set up a statutory system of regulating the press. And John Major's cabinet, we were all virtually unanimous in wanting to say no. And we were assured by the then chair of the Press Complaints Commission, John Wakeham, now Lord Wakeham, that the Press Complaints Commission would meet the challenge of our times and set up a much more independent, self-regulatory system which would earn respect. So that's my history. Where are we today? Well, it's almost as if it occurs every 20 or so years. Suddenly there was another outcry against the invasions of the press. This time in a way that mirrored what had happened before. I don't know whether you've ever heard of the phrase Squidgy Gate, but certainly there was evidence way back at the time of Sir David Calcutt's report that hacking had taken place into the private telephone conversations of members of the royal family. But this time it was even more serious. There was a tragedy, a tragic disappearance and eventual murder of a young girl called Millie Dowler. And you probably know that what happened was that certain journalists from one of our main newspapers had hacked into Millie Dowler's phone, and it was reported in one of the papers, had thereby caused certain messages to be deleted, leading the parents to believe that Millie Dowler was still alive. That came on the back of a number of other instances. Probably the one I know the best is the Watson family, but also Chris Jeffries, who in fact is a good friend of mine in Bristol, who was vilified in the press for having been involved in the disappearance of one young, eventually murdered girl. And so it was that the crisis arose again. By this time, I had moved on. I was no longer in the cabinet. I shadowed somebody called Peter Mandelson, Lord Mandelson, from the opposition benches, and led a rebellion in the House of Lords to stop what was called the Racial and Religious Hatred Bill, which sought to constrain the ability to insult or abuse people. And all our comedians rose in revolt to say that they spent their lives insulting and abusing people, and how dare Parliament try and stop them. Led by Rowan Atkinson, who you may otherwise know as Mr. Bean. Well, my amendment received a very large majority, and eventually the government was defeated and the bill was rewritten. When the Dowler events unfolded, the government, the opposition, indeed all the main political leaders then called for some sea change in the governance of the press and set up an inquiry under Lord Justice Leveson called the Culture, Practices and Ethics of the Press. I was watching this with great interest because I had now returned to what my partners in my law firm call an honest day's work. I was back at my desk in my law practice, now 1,500 lawyers across the world, and my special subject is the regulation ethos generally, whether it's regulating financial services or whatever. And the chair of the Press Complaints Commission, Peter Buscombe, the Baroness Buscombe, was facing calls for resignation, and she did resign, over a report that the PCC had produced in 2009 saying that there was no real problem over phone hacking, just one or two isolated instances, and indeed criticised one of our main newspapers for having exaggerated the problem, although eventually it transpired that they had underestimated the problem, and which was much more serious. So on the resignation of the previous chair, I decided to apply, as did many hundreds of others. But my application, as the Secretary General has just outlined, was very much on the basis that something had to change, and that I didn't want to chair the Press Complaints Commission. I wanted to help create a new body. And I'm delighted to see John Horgan here, because I took many lessons from the Irish Press Council and also a number of other press councils across the world. Believing as I do in the self-regulation of the press and the editor's code, which eventually during the Leveson inquiry received full marks. Lord Justice Leveson said that the code was a very good code, but it needed an independent monitoring and enforcement body. And so that is what I decided should be set up. And that is where we are today. So where are we today? Which is what I will just seek to explain very briefly. What has happened is that Parliament, of course, has intervened. Although Lord Justice Leveson, on the 29th of November last year, announced that he was totally opposed to statutory regulation and parliamentary intervention, Parliament intervened. MPs started debating, how are we going to control the press? They indeed had a wonderful debate where they acknowledged that the former President Roosevelt was right in saying there are 4 basic human freedoms, the most important of which is freedom of speech and expression. But really we've got to find some way of ensuring that the press realise that their right carries with it responsibilities, and we in Parliament want to set up the sort of standards that they should observe and not leave it to the editors and to the journalists. One of my adversaries in politics over the years has been somebody called John Prescott. And Lord Prescott, every time he sees me now, wags his finger in my direction and said, "When are you going to persuade the press to write something nice about me? I've done a great deal. Kosovo would never have happened without my intervention," etc. And all sorts of things like, and of course, the climate change treaty would never have happened. Eventually, John Prescott and I agreed that what the press were writing was absolutely true. It was just irrelevant. What relevance was it that he had once had his wicked way with his diary secretary, that he played croquet at a time when he was supposed to be running the country, that he'd hit somebody during a general election campaign? Why would that enter stories about climate change? And this is the greatest difficulty we face, that parliamentarians have very strong views. I have very strong views. I was vilified by the press. I think the kindest word they ever spoke about me when I was in the cabinet was one journalist, famous journalist, Edward Pearce, said, "David Hunt is like a sponge, a sponge." But on reflection, even a sponge can be useful. And that was the sort of, we get this all the time in Parliament. But now we have decided to avoid parliamentary scrutiny and go for the ideal solution which Lord Justice Leveson laid out in his report. He said in his report, the ideal outcome is a satisfactory independent regulatory body established by the industry. And that is what happened last week, that the industry met and unanimously decided to set up their own body called IPSO, the Independent Press Standards Organisation, which will take the place of the Press Complaints Commission, transferring to it the existing complaints handling ability of the PCC, but also having a standards arm. Still with the Editor's Code at its core, which cannot be changed by the independent IPSO. It still lies with the editors to be in charge of the Editor's Code Committee, but with independent members. But above all, there should be an independent board under IPSO which will monitor and enforce the code. My final remark is that all this is still very much on the parliamentary agenda. One of the ministers in the coalition government thought of the idea, well, we ought to have somebody overlooking this new body. And the best thing is to establish by this oversight body by royal charter. And the big problem occurred when the victims' organisation, representing the Watson family, Chris Jeffries, the Dower family, etc., and above all Hugh Grant, they decided that they would rewrite the Royal Charter, and the last thing you should ever do is to allow victims to write the law. One should take account of victims and their suffering to ensure such things can never happen again. But putting them in, and their lawyers, into the business of writing the script for the oversight body was a big mistake. And the Royal Charter debate has become a little bit of a sideshow at the moment. The great thing now is to set up the new PCC, IPSO, and then at least you have an opportunity to road test the new organisation. without government and without parliamentary interference. So please, wish us luck. We will do our best, and we're now at last getting down to the business of creating a new body which will mirror and uphold all those aspects of the PCC which have become renowned across the world and much respected. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, it's time to get to the business at hand. I invite the moderator of this first session, Dr. Leila Schwarz-Altschuler, to come over and summon her flock and start with the business of today. Okay.
Good morning. So perhaps I'll say a few words. First of all, thank you for the opportunity to be here today with you. And before I will invite the honorable participants of this panel, I would like to perhaps give some framework for this new panel, the first panel. I come from the area of media and new media regulation. I did write previously about press councils and other aspects of self-regulation, but I feel that when we talk about press ethics and self-regulation and any debate over its future, we cannot isolate the discussion from a wider discussion about the media. And as Lord Justice Leveson, who was just mentioned here, as the report will probably dominate this, the headlines of this conference with a major focus on print journalism, it is worth reminding ourselves of the wider picture of media regulation. And I don't think it's any news for you to say that consumers, particularly the younger ones, are engaging with a range of broadcast, online, print, self-scheduled specifically content. Yet the standards applied to these services increasingly lack any consistency today and fail to enable citizens to make informed, democratic choices across media platforms. And if we're talking about newspapers, they're not just printed out, but online. And they carry video packages with the look and feel of television. Broadcasters publish websites including text-based articles similar to the online print offerings. Scheduled programs are broadcast but also available on demand, both on digital channels and on a variety of websites. We're talking about user-generated content and materials that waits for online audiences alongside professionally produced content, and professional and amateur bloggers. They share the same debates as if they were equal. And they were not, let's say, 15 years ago. If we're talking about access via PCs, smartphones, tablet devices, we're talking about regulated and unregulated content, licensed and unlicensed services. They're all becoming impossible to differentiate. And some materials is subject to comprehensive rules today, set down by parliaments, let's say, some to lighter touch co-regulation, some to voluntary self-regulation rules, some to no regulatory authority at all. And any discussion needs, therefore, to recognize, first and foremost, that the current regulatory framework attaching regulation to the method of delivery has run its course, basically. And without a coherent and cross-platform regulatory approach, citizens cannot base their expectations of content on any consistent framework. They cannot sensibly evaluate its credibility, nor make any informed judgments about engagement with it, nor can they differentiate regulated and unregulated content in any meaningful way. So the aim of this panel is to ask where in this bigger picture located the discussion about press councils. What are the chances and the risks that the converged media world brings with it for councils and for the self-regulatory approach and perception as a whole? So let me invite the honorable participants of the panel, Professor Joan Horgan, the Press Ombudsman of Ireland, Mr. Ola Sigvardsson, the Press Ombudsman of Sweden, Mr. Hanoch Marmari, former editor-in-chief of Haaretz daily newspaper, and currently the editor of the Seventh Eye online media watchdog newspaper at the Israel Democracy Institute, and Ms. Tal Schneider. Tal is a political reporter and blogger. I will dedicate a few words for her because I'm not sure you all know her. She's a political reporter and blogger. She runs the Plug. Plug is a combination of the words politics and blog, which appears regularly in Haaretz and the online blogging platform Saluna, the Israeli online blogging platform Saluna. She was the Ma'ariv DC correspondent between 2004 and 2009 and covered both the 2004-2008 presidential elections for Ma'ariv. Prior to that, she worked for 6 years as a media law attorney representing newspapers and journalists in Israeli courts. I personally call her the Israeli Ariana Huffington. So, I would like to refer to you, Mr. Sigvardsson, to start. Any discussion that connects Sweden and Press Council naturally raises the question, how do the Swedes do it? By all accounts, your system works pretty well. Maybe it is because you enjoy strong public interest to defend. Maybe it is because the press council is not dominated by the industry. Maybe it is because Swedish journalists who believe he or she is being asked to break the ethics code can refuse, unlike, let's say, a couple of cases that we've seen in Israel lately. And maybe it is because the main sanction is public shaming. Now, Sweden is not Israel. I know that. Neither is it the UK. It is small, it is consensual, it is a high-minded country with the oldest freedom of information law in the world. It is also a country where that unusual transparency is matched by unusual clean politics. Another thing we can yearn for in Israel. One might even add that the Swedes also take a more grown-up view on sex in the media than the British, perhaps. But if we talk about the future, what to be learned from the successful models of the legendary world? What lessons should we take with us to any future arrangements?
Okay.
Do you want to? Do you want to come and stand?
Yes, please. Well, thank you very much for that kind introduction. Changing systems like ours is, as so many other things in life, a matter of timing. When it comes to the media outlets, the media operations, I think they need to change very rapidly to remain competitive in the new media scene. But I think the press councils have chosen a wiser way when having a slower pace when it comes to changing the rules and the working methods of the press councils. I mean, I think you could compare it to legislation. I mean, it takes much, much longer time to change a law than changing reality. And I think most of the time this is a good thing. I mean, legislation and, for example, codes of ethics, they should be robust. They should not change every other week, but to remain trustworthy in the public eye, they should be relatively the same over time. Having said that, I think we are approaching a situation where it is necessary for us, for all of us, to look into our own systems and see what can we change. And the next few remarks I will give you are, of course, from the Swedish experience, but I hope they are applicable in some way to others. First of all, the first question we have to ask ourselves is, what can we change? For the Swedish part, we can, of course, change the code of ethics. We can change the instruction for the press council or for the press ombudsman. To some extent, we may change also who we try and what we try. But in our case, there is at least one borderline we cannot cross, a red line, so to speak. And that is actually the word self in self-regulation. Self and self-regulation, that not only means that the media business is taking care of its own problems when it comes to ethics, it also means that we don't have the authority, the powers of an authority. We can only try, scrutinize and criticize those media operations who want to be tried, scrutinized and criticized by us. We have no power to force. We can only persuade. And given this, I would say it is a fact that already today, and much more so in the future, the majority, the vast majority of the new media outlets will not be part of the press ethical systems. They will stand outside. And I don't think that is something we should be afraid of. I don't think that's a threat to us, something we should forget about. I think we should emphasize it. It is good. It's a good thing that a news operation says, we want to be a part of the self-regulation. It sends the signal that they want to have decent publishing. And I think that is using ethics as a mark of quality, differentiated to those media operations that choose to stay outside. Given this, we have made two changes in the Swedish systems over the past few years to when it comes to the new media situation. First of all, we already cover, our press council already covers all printed media and our websites. But if a web paper is not printed, it's only published on the web, it's outside our press council. So a few years back we changed our rules and said that those web papers who wanted could free willingly enter our systems. Actually, not many have. I think up to date we have roughly 10 web papers who have free willingly got into our system. But actually, we got one last week. It is a local web paper in a small town in the north of Sweden. They have no journalists, no newsroom. All they publish is written by the public. But they have a legally responsible publisher for everything that is published on in their web paper. And having that, they are allowed to enter our press ethical system. We don't care if it's a journalist or the public who writes. It's who is responsible legally. That gives us the difference. And a few days ago, I called this publisher to welcome him into our ethical system. And he was very happy to be in the system. And I also asked him, why? Why do you want to be a part of our system? You don't have to. Why? And he said, I do this because I want to show my public that we mean serious business in our town, that we want to have decent publishing on our small web paper. I want to use the ethics as a mark of quality. The second thing we have done to change our rules is, as I said, we already cover all printed media and all their websites, but we have not covered accounts in social media on the internet. But from the 1st of January, we have changed our rules so that social media accounts, for example, Facebook or Twitter, that are connected to the news operations that we cover, that is part of a newspaper, for example, will be tried in the Press Council in the future. And these are the two small, careful, gentle steps we have taken to walk into the scene of the new digital media. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. So we may sum up and say that at the heart of the debate is the core question of mandatory versus voluntary regulation. And a careful look might show that there isn't a binary choice, but a spectrum of approaches ranging from wholly voluntary self-regulation by industry through independent regulation, where representatives of the public provide a significant presence on press councils, through incentivized regulation, where voluntary press council membership is recognized in statute, through to co-regulation, which includes elements of statutory compulsion with, I would say, 50 more shades of regulation between and beyond. So perhaps the most significant area is the middle ground between voluntary and mandatory regulation. And here I think Ireland offers a useful example of a regulatory framework in which incentivized and active compliance is voluntary, but recognized in statute, and supposedly independent both of industry and the state. So the new system was launched back in 2008, partly to provide an alternative to a growing incidence of costly litigation and to head off perhaps the threat of a new privacy law. Therefore, I would like to ask Professor Organ to elaborate on the applicability of the Irish model to the what we call press councils of the digital age.
Thank you very much. I will try to keep to my 7 minutes. The moderator sent me an email saying I had 7 minutes, and when I looked at the list of things she wanted me to talk about, I thought 70 minutes would be rather better, but I won't terrify her by taking that.
But I got some instructions, and you may assume, right?
I would like to endorse what the moderator has said about there being a spectrum, but I would like also to emphasize that the two poles of this spectrum are very significant. One of them is the voluntary pole, and the other is the statutory pole. To my mind, the system that we have tries to address, and so far I think has satisfactorily addressed, I stressed so far, the fact that the plus of a voluntary system is that you don't have issues with enforcement. The negative of a voluntary system is that you cannot enforce anything to which the press concerned will not agree. So, in all of this, I think that a voluntary press council has also a developmental role. That rather than simply sitting down and accepting what effectively the menu that it has been given by the people who have established it and who fund it, they should also think developmentally, to think in terms of how the two words that I think govern voluntary systems better than the word regulation, because I think regulation implies something different. It is on the statutory end of that particular scale. The two words that I think categorize and characterize voluntary systems more exactly are accountability and redress. And so I think that any voluntary press council which takes itself seriously and its work seriously must continually look at ways in which the accountability of its media and the redress available to people about whom the media have broken the code of ethics can be refined and improved. And this, in my view, is an ongoing organic process that every voluntary press council should always be engaged in. I'll address the other issues raised by our moderator very briefly. The question of who is a journalist. I read an interesting piece of research recently which suggested that 93% of blogs are read by only one person, the person who wrote them. At the same time, the blog is an indefinable but essential extension of the constitutional freedom of speech that we all see. And against that, I would put another pole, if you like, with the individual blogger at one end and media institutions at the other. I think the question of institutions is very important, that people look to institutions for credibility and authority, and institutions which can guarantee credibility and authority and authenticity will survive when institutions which cannot give these guarantees will not. So the question is, at one end of the spectrum, what are the ethical responsibilities of bloggers, and how can these be enforced, or how can redress and accountability be ensured? And at the other end, are the media institutions within which media professionals and others work, live, move, and have their being, how they can continually reform themselves so that their accountability to the public that they serve and the redress available to the public that they serve can be enhanced and improved. I was very interested in what our Swedish colleague had to say. We have recently successfully negotiated with the major Irish digital-only news website membership of the council. This took a long time. It took a long time because the press, the print newspapers, were very hostile initially. They feared that these digital-only websites were acting as pirates, taking their news, expensively produced news stories and recirculating them for their own financial and commercial purposes. So we spent 3 years in deciding, first of all, what were the appropriate criteria for digitally based web news sites. That was successfully agreed. And the next thing, which was almost as difficult, was how to decide the metrics on the basis of which the financial contribution to the running of the press council would be made by these digital organizations. And these problems have now, I'm very glad to say, been overcome. And also in relation to the contribution from our Swedish colleague, we had very recently the first complaint against a Twitter account operated by a newspaper. And we have taken that complaint up. It is still in the process of conciliation, so I don't know what the outcome will be. But what I found very interesting was that the newspaper running the Twitter account, which was the subject of the complaint, did not argue with us that this was outside our remit. They accepted immediately that this was part of our function. This doesn't solve all the problems in relation to social media accounts, and particularly in relation to user-generated content. In the common law system in which we operate, there is no legislation, and there is very little case law that determines the liability or responsibility for user-generated content on newspaper websites. One school of thought says that if the newspaper pre-moderates this content, then it is liable for it. And it would be also reasonable to suppose that if a newspaper pre-moderates user-generated content, that user-generated content should also come within the remit of the Press Council and the Press Ombudsman. the other school of thought, which is equally strong, and there's no law to decide which is right and which is wrong, is that if newspapers do not pre-moderate user-generated content, they are not liable for what is said. They are simply acting as a digital platform and not as a content provider, and therefore they are not liable legally, and therefore it should not come under the remit of the Press Ombudsman or the Press Council. So these are big legal issues, but also ethical issues and jurisdictional issues for us as a Press Ombudsman, for me as a Press Ombudsman, and for the Press Council. We look forward in the future, I think, to increasing participation by digital media and to increasing supervision, if you like, by us over the digital side of the established legacy traditional print media. One of the objections, funnily enough, that was raised by newspaper people to the inclusion of a digital-only news website as a member of the Press Council was the accusation that, well, they only want membership of the Press Council to make them to make it appear to the world that they have good standards, so they will be able to sell the company at a big profit. And so I say, what's wrong with that? If they accept the restrictions and the controls and the standards of the Press Council, they're entitled to do whatever they like with it. And funnily enough, and particularly at a time of increasing financial problems affecting the print media, it is very important, I think, that any media institution which is a member of a Press Council or a Press Ombudsman's office or whatever should bear in mind that this is not simply a cost, it is also a benefit. It is a benefit for them in the short, in the medium, and the long term, and should be seen as this. Now, the final thing I would say is that we have been in existence now for 6 years, and in response to Lord Hunt, I would say that when we were set up, the PCC could not have been more generous in terms of giving us the benefit of their time and their experience in helping us to set up our model, even though it distinguishes itself from the Press Council in various ways. We have now established, because we've been there for 6 years, we are now looking at an overall review of the structure and the financing and so on of our council, partly under the impulse of the financial problems which are affecting the industry, but partly because we think at 6 years it's a good time to carry out our own review in any case. The final thing I'd say about the structure and nature of our council is that it has a number of core ideas. One is that the code, the ethical and professional practice code of our council and of my office is written and determined by the editors. And in that sense, I have some small doubts about even the Levesonian model of bringing public interest people into the business of determining the code, because it is absolutely critical in any voluntary system that it has the full confidence and participation of the editors. And in our experience, that will only be forthcoming in an irreversible and permanent way if the editors know that they have jurisdiction over the code. The other part of that equation is that the adjudications about whether the code has been broken or not must be made by an independent body whose independence is visible and which is not dominated or controlled by the editors who have written the code itself. Those are the two central things. Thank you very much for your time.
About the Israeli case, as well as a general observation about the future of Press Council. I'm waiting.
Take care. Greetings to you all, in particular to our own Press Council, which is celebrating today its 50th year of commendable activity. We wish it success in contending with the great challenges that face and that face us all. It is pleasant to look back over the years to those far-off days of innocence, days when the work of journalism was entirely in the hand of several weighty institutions, the Government Broadcasting Authority and a few daily newspapers, which were run by the authoritative editors in a way that government's officials refer to as responsible. That is a way that serves the national idea in general and the incumbent government in particular. It is good to fondly recall those moments, but there is no need and no way to relive them. Somewhat belatedly, all of the press councils must adjust to the chaotic, critical, and cranky media that saturate us today and adapt themselves to the challenges that await in the next 50 years. No one can predict, of course, where these years will lead, but we can confidently declare that they will be stormy and exciting years. For the first time in history, every person can directly influence the world around him without the need for statues or resources. Sailing the ocean of information is open to all and not only to the bearded captains of large ships. Each swimmer can choose how deep to enter and how far to go. Our press council members used to complain during its early days about its lack of statutory teeth that would enable it to impose its authority on journalists. But today, it can be commended for being ahead of its time in realizing that journalism is not a guild like all of the others, and that its power actually lies in the voluntary way in which it offers its services in order to create rules of ethics and to judge complaints about violations of these rules. Like most organizations of its type, the Council has a meager budget, but its impact has important juncture, primarily in the legislative process regarding the press, has become effective and sometimes even influential. The Council has served as a barrier between the eager legislators and the institutions of journalism, and has blocked many of restrictive proposals to our members of Knesset, that our members of Knesset are prolific in submitting. The Council has done it with wisdom, convinced that the existing laws with its criminal component is sufficiently powerful to cope with the difficult incidents, and all the rest is ethics. The simple and clear code of ethics the Council formulated with its 26 articles continue to serve as a universal yardstick of values for the public and for the institutions here, and its great achievements lie in its influence in resolving conflicts already in the early stages. Thanks to the Council, we have been spared countless of exhausting inquiries and costly and grueling legal proceedings. The State of Israel is a lively democracy, but it built upon vocal discourse that is built upon vocal discourse between various groups and sectors who use intensively, some more than the other, the instrument of journalism, but not necessarily cherish the freedom of the press. Alongside outdated legislation, whose foundation we inherit from the British mandatory law, an open practice of exercise of freedom of expression, though sometimes extreme and acrimonious, is flowering here. The old institutions of journalism are weakening and rapidly losing their influence, and the blogosphere has its say with no inhibitions, just like the social networks. It is no longer possible to enter this chaos with a court of ethics and to rely on its rulings. If it was impossible for the long, sharp fangs of the British Mandate-era regulations to catch a bird in flight, what good would become from a biting approach by the actual ethics boards? The good news is that the new disorder also presents an opportunity. The absolute freedom intensifies the market's need for a yardstick of values. And the new Press Council can provide this yardstick by virtue of its broad composition and expertise in both the world of journalism and the world of law. The main effort required of ethicists to reformulate all definitions so they will also be valid for the internet. The need to address the question of who is a journalist with the guiding principle being that a journalist is not someone who holds a press card. Journalistic work can serve as a source of livelihood or income, but it doesn't have to be so. Journalism can be a means for expression in diverse media, but its objective remains the same, to address the public in a direct, free, and independent way. Good journalism is a special flower that can blossom only on a free and open society. It is rightfully described as a mission and not as a job. Has anyone ever considered defining lawyers, accountants, or dentists as the life breath of democracy? While the previous century it was sufficient to rely on the practical definition of a journalist as someone who works for a newspaper, in the current century many journalists operate independently outside of any organizational framework. In the new world, we may have to stop trying to define who is a journalist and to suffice instead with a definition that is no less important, defining journalism as a civic act, not as a profession. From this definition, it may then be possible to derive definition of the person who engages in this action. It would then be easy to define the journalistic source and the journalistic purpose. It would be necessary to emphasize that the only purpose of journalistic work is to bring the journalistic product to the public's attention, free of any dependence or any outside entity, and not to make any other use of it. The new Press Council, if just 10 commandments were required to define universal values for all human beings, we can make do with less in our case: transparency, fairness, honesty, and an aspiration to uncover the truth. The new Press Council will offer the rule of ethics unconditionally and free of charge to any person or organization that declares that it abides by them and implements them. This declaration will constitute new council stamp of approval. The public will be able to enjoy arbitration and complaint handling service which the council will offer to any person or organization who seeks to submit, for any person who seeks to submit a complaint against someone who has received this stamp of approval. If there are Physicians Without Borders and Reporters Without Borders, then let us form a network of press councils without borders. I believe that it can serve us well for the next 50 years. Happy anniversary, dear Press Council friends, and have a productive conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Perhaps if I may sum up your ideas and maybe widen them a little bit, I could say we talk about now about maybe incentivize voluntary participation. If I understand well, you mean that newspapers and other media institutions in print and online, as well as independent journalists and bloggers, would have the choice of electing standards as a, maybe you mentioned this before, selling point, and enjoying associated benefits. Conversely, they could choose to operate outside the regulated sphere and simply within the law, as is the case of unregulated online content. And benefits and privileges could include accreditation in relation to court reporting and other privileged access to information, recognition of affiliation by the courts in any privacy or defamation proceedings, and in return to the benefits of membership, the regulated press would be required to agree and accept a range of sanctions and perhaps investigatory procedures as the disposal of the new regulatory body, including suspension and expulsion from its membership and associated benefits. So now I want to refer to you, Ms. Snyder. You're a blogger, an independent blogger, but you're also being occupied by traditional and legendary media. How exactly does transformation between various regulatory arenas or regulatory levels should work? Is it possible? Is it necessary? Is it logical? Do you want to? Yeah, it's fine.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for inviting me today. When we spoke yesterday, a few days ago, Tehilani said I'll be here as the representative of the practical side, because I do not have a broad spectrum and experience all of you and you have. I only know what I'm doing as a blogger, as a reporter. I was a reporter before I was a blogger, and so I never really saw any differences between the two of them. I always felt that either if I'm writing a tweet or I'm writing a post on Facebook or on my blog, which appears on AIPCE or anywhere else, it may appear on my, I have my own blog and it appears in other websites. It's always me personally responsible for every character, even if it's 140 character on Twitter. It's just whatever I do and whatever I write with it, and for the same ethics and the same rules apply to me as it were if I was a reporter in the paper, and I was a reporter in the Ma'ariv for many years. So we were trying to figure out what are the differences for me as a person who is doing a job, and I was trying to look for an anecdote from my work to see how this new time with the new media changed me. And so I brought this little story, or maybe give us a good example. And I'm doing politics reporting, and in the Knesset, where I spent some of my time, it's forbidden to take photos at the lunchroom. But someone leaked me a photo that was taken in the lunchroom of two prominent political figures in Israel, Naftali Bennett, who is now the Commerce Minister, and Yair Lapid, who is now the Finance Minister. And the photo was taken in the heat of the political negotiation on forming the government. So it was a good, a good image, leaked, unforbidden to be, not forbidden to be taken by me, but someone took it. And I had nothing on that image except the situation of two people sitting together and negotiating. So it's a public, it's interesting for the public. And there were two other persons sitting on the same table in the lunchroom talking with those two future to be ministers. And I said, what do you do? It's not a story. It's not even. It's maybe a tweet. It's maybe I can post it to Facebook. And I posted to Facebook and I said, the heat of the negotiations. I have no idea what they're talking about because I never took the picture. I never saw it happening. And I wonder where those other two persons sitting with them. And the response from the readers was immediate. The first thing they said, and this is ethics, they said, it's not allowed to take pictures over there. Why did you do that? And I said, I never took the picture. It's leaked to me. I'm a reporter. I can receive leaked information and do with it. It's freedom of the press. I do it. I do with it what I want. Some of the readers were, upset with me. There are rules. You should abide by the rules and stuff like that. And I was amazed by the fact that the wide crowd knows much more than I do sometimes. So the first lesson for the ethics is that the public knows better than I do. And then I said, can you help me figure out who are the other two figures in this political image? And I got on my personal Facebook account, you can message with other people. I got immediate response from readers that are right-wing political, knowledgeable person who said, this is a felon. This is the third person that was sitting on the table. This is a member of the Jewish underground from the 80s. His name is Natan Zan. He planted a bomb under the car of the mayor of Nablus, right? And he is serving as a political advisor to Naftali Bennett. I'm like, wow. This is a little bit more than a tweet and a Facebook post. It's, it's a story. Why is it a story? Because Yair Lapid, the other minister on the table, just said a few months ago that he will not negotiate with Nathan Eshel, who is the Prime Minister's chief of staff, who harassed women. So, because, and never convicted in court, but, convicted in a civil arrangement. So, we have one minister saying these things, the other minister is sitting with a former felon. If you're felon, it's never a former, but someone who served jail in Israel, and it became a story due to the help of the readers, because the person who leaked the image to me did not know who is Natan Netizan is. We're talking about the 80s, it's more than 30 years ago. I had no idea I knew him by name, but I never, connected the image to the person. Also, the image was from behind, so I could only see his kippah. I could not see the face. So, so there's no reason for me to know who this person was. So the Facebook status and the tweet became a story that went into my blog at Haaretz, saying, how come Lapid is negotiating political, issues with the person who is a felon. And this story developed twice with readers' help. First, with a discussion about, ethics rules. Why do I, post an image that is was taken in a place where images are not supposed to be taken? And the second, of course, was the readers' help for me to figure out who this figure is. I think this may be summing up a little bit of, the way I work. This is something that would never happen in Ma'ariv, where I worked before, if I had an editor with me who was limiting me and coming up and saying, bring the story first, don't publish, don't put it out, bring the whole story first, bring the scoop, bring the breaking news. And I don't mind as a blogger not having a breaking news, but having a discussion with the readers that gives me information and helps me develop a story. So I may interview a lady that is running to Migdal Emek, that happened just a few weeks ago, and I would post her, part of the interview with her while we are talking on my Facebook, and then I will write this story only later for the next day. I do not, keep the information with me at all times until I have the whole story. I let readers develop the story with me. Having said that, do you want me to continue?
A little bit more.
Okay. Having said that, every tweet or every Facebook post that I do is a story, because I see reporters or bloggers as storytellers. So every tweet or every Facebook post has to be, well written, factual, checked in advance, or if I need to get a comment before I put it up, it needs to be with a punch. And if it's wrong or it's violating someone's right, it has to be corrected or apologized for. And I keep those rules with me at all times. I do not see any change from things I put in the paper in the past that were under the inspection of my editor, or if I put it right now on my Facebook and it's only me controlling it. There's no change in the ethics for me. And I truly try to keep it in my work day And sometimes I think that the situation right now is even more harsh on me because I know that I don't have the protection that sometimes come with a news organization. So it's only me out there. AIPCE will not protect me. I don't know, they might do, but they might not protect me if I do something wrong in my blog, because I control, my blog in AIPCE, I control it. I don't have any editors limiting me in the process. They do not, we do not, they are talking in advance on where to go and what to cover, and they do not correct my mistakes if there are any, and there are. Even language or the way I articulate things. So I suppose that if I have any problems, it's only on me, on my shoulders. So that gives me extra precautious, because I think a little bit further down deep to what I put out, because I know it's only me out there. So also, I do have a little bit of arguments with other people about who is a reporter and who is a blogger. There's a lot of down deep to what I put out, because I know it's only me out there. So also, I do have a little bit of arguments with other people about who is a reporter and who is a blogger. There's a lot of
keep it for the second round.
Okay.
Okay. Didn't even finish.
I can talk forever, but
Thank you very much. So we have a little bit more time to go on a second round where you can comment on what we've heard before, but I want to perhaps take the discussion one step further. I want to dig in a little bit into the possibility of the Press Council as a provider of a standard mark, a kite mark, a ladybug seal, a yardstick, whatever you want to call it, on a voluntary basis. I'm thinking about an opting-in system that was, let's say, criticized 20 years ago, but seems now perhaps as the only practical way in the online world. So those standard marks will enable citizens and consumers to access a varied but coherent public space across broadcast, print, video on demand, even in related online services. And what is so appealing to me in this approach is that it takes as its starting point the objective of enabling rather than protecting the public. Consumers would be enabled to access, navigate, engage with journalism and wider media content as active, informed citizens who make choices about media content. And this is, I think, the opposite of the couch potato protecting approach that characterized the 20th century media regulation and perhaps even the media councils, the press councils. Could this be done without migrating the deficiencies of the old press councils, such as industry control, governmental control, lack of resources and authority, and so on? Is it possible at all? So I would like to start with you, Professor Organ.
Right, can I do?
Yeah, no, we're not playing the share game.
Sure,
No.
good. The question of the kite mark and the quality assurance, if you like, that's a very important one. We had a long discussion before the Defamation Act in Ireland was passed in 2009, because many of the newspapers who were prepared to set up a press council felt that there was no point in setting up a press council unless everybody was in it. And we have been pretty successful in that, although there are many free newspapers in particular. Some of the bigger free newspapers in the regions have decided not to join, and whether they have any professional standards or not, I'm not quite clear, although they do have members of the Journalists Union working for them. Under the Irish Constitution, it was impossible to force anybody to become a member of the Press Council who did not want to become a member of the Press Council. And this may also operate in other jurisdictions. But we did, but equally, the defamation law gave some privileges to member publications, to the Council itself, and to the Council itself in the matter of defamation. The privileges that it gave to member publications are somewhat unclear and have not been tested in court. these privileges and incentives are that in a defamation action, a judge may take into account the membership of the press council of the publication concerned, its adherence to the code of practice, and its willingness to publish decisions upholding complaints against it. We have no case law on this at the moment whatsoever. Where the furthest that the Department of Justice felt that they could come to meet us on trying to make this a universal press council was that they said the somewhat unclear privileges attaching to member publications of the press council would also be available to other publications which were not members of the press council, as long as they could demonstrate to a court that they operated to standards that were not inferior to those of the press council. To my mind, a publication that is not a member of the press council and is being sued for defamation, most of them would have a very hard job proving in court that their standards were the same as ours. But this has not been tested, and for the time being, those other publications that are not members do regard it as an unnecessary expense, an unnecessary control of their content, and so far the willingness to join of these other publications has not been demonstrated. So we are stuck really in that kind of halfway house between being a council for all of the publications and a council only for those publications which accept the liabilities as well as the advantages.
Thank you. Our board for our press council consists of 4 major organizations in the media. It's the Newspaper Publishers Association, it's the Magazine Publishers Association, the Journalist Working Force, and the National Press Club. And they decide on our code of ethics, and they also decide about instructions for me, for example. And I know they have a discussion when it comes to using membership for the press council as a mark of quality, and that you can actively use it in the newspapers and on the website as a mark of quality. But personally, I don't agree with the thought that giving special benefits to those who go into a system like this. I think we should have equal opportunities for working journalists, whether which paper or website you ever come from, and that the decisions in the press council should be a story by itself.
I can see a universe of multiple press or council, kinds of press council that each individual or organization can accept their terms and work within it. I wouldn't, in fact, practically, this is the case of the Code of Ethics in Israel. We have, I think, no less than 4 or 5. We have the IBA's Code of Ethics, and we have the Second Authority Code of Ethics, and we have this organization, this syndicate of journalists that have its own, and the other have another. And then there is, you know, what we call the official press council that we are celebrating its anniversary.
It's the only one that's recognized by the Israeli Supreme Court, mind you. Right?
Yes, it was one case, and well, if you go into details, it has 2 cases. Oh, sorry, but at least one is quite problematic, I guess.
So I must know it.
Anyway,
it was long ago.
Sorry.
You dreamed to be the president of the press council. You recognize this code as the official code of your profession.
Well, I just would suggest 2 lines. One line should be, you know, a shared values aspect. And I would speak then basically on those values that we all mentioned here and there. And it's universal, like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights or whatever. Well, you can adhere to it, you can sign it, and so on. But the other thing is facilitating, and I think this is a more practical and important part of a press council, to become a buffer. I mean, not that everyone will go to court and pay his whatever to sue. But you know, there are many ways that a clever facilitator, an authoritative one, could be very helpful and useful. And this is another part that the press council can play, whether it's, you know, limited or broad. But I think that if it will become, you know, respected and known, I think it will have plenty of work to do.
You wanted to talk about the journalist, who was a journalist?
Yeah, well, I could refer to the question that was a journalist. It's okay. Because a lot of people that are, a lot of people in Israel complaining that the Israeli media is very to the left, and there's no right-wing media in Israel. That's what they say. I do I disagree with that, but when I get into these arguments with readers, I tell them, I'm a blogger. I became, a blogger by myself. You can go ahead if you think that the media is too much to the left. Go ahead and put out your right-wing, opinion out there. You will just, you can put a Facebook status or a tweet just like I do. I mean, I don't have any limitations on what I do, so go ahead and be your own media outlet. Because from what we see with the WordPress too, and Facebook and Twitter and all the others platforms, is that anyone is a reporter. So the question comes to, if everyone is a reporter, how do you deal with this world of, you cannot, as a press council, I suppose, apply yourself to everyone in the world. So what do you do? How do you consider who do you apply to? And I do think that in this time, the only thing that maybe separate, I hope, me from others that write status all the time, is that I really, really try to build my credibility and reputation. And it's so important to me, more than anything else, because I know that if I write something wrong, or if I lie, or if I do something that is borderline, I get immediate public sanction. The readers can smell that from distance, and they will not believe you anymore. So that's what differentiates me a bit, I hope, from others. And anyone who want to be a blogger or want to be a reporter, who want to build a Huffington Post, which I didn't build yet, but anyone can do that. It has all the tools and it costs nothing. The only thing he has to do with, really be careful about it is how to build his reputation and his credibility. And if he's not able to do it, then the public will not believe him. So this is maybe the only thing that, it's like the line that, different people that do this on a professional side than others.
Okay. Has one comment about what you've just said. The converging media arena. I think one of its outcomes is the fact that in the past, impartiality, for example, just as an example, has been at the core of broadcasting requirements, whereas partiality was the heart of the newspaper freedom. So in this sense, we will need to combine those somehow, or to set new standards. 15 minutes I promised to dedicate to questions from the audience. So please feel free. I will take questions. If you just please stand up while asking so that everyone can hear you.
I think it's working.
You wanna
I had just
yourself a little to say who you are and where you are.
okay, Aline from UNESCO. I just had a very practical question for the Swedish and Irish Press Council. Now that they accept complaint about Twitter account or Facebook account, do you make a difference? I mean, for me that's really clear that you can get the Twitter account of a newspaper, but do you also accept complaint about the journalists? Because now, like how they are actually like mixing their private account. I'm also curious about your experience. Like a lot of journalists are mixing between their private stories and their Facebook account and their professional ones. So I'm just wondering how you're dealing with this.
Yes, we are dealing with this in the way you suggested, that we only the accounts that are controlled by the newspapers, that are the only ones that we can work with, not the private accounts of journalists. And the reason why is actually that accountability comes to the editor of the newspaper, the legal responsible publisher, and not the individual journalist. That's the basis for the system in Sweden, and therefore we cannot go working with the private accounts.
I would like to know whether any of you have asked or allowed your members to publish the watermark. You know, I've spent the good part of the past year trying to convince our members to do it. I've engaged a graphic designer who came up with a very nice sign, you know, emblem, member of press council. One editor said, yes, we're going for it, definitely. Give me some time. That was 6 months ago. Still no go. I'm just wondering whether this is a practice that is to be found elsewhere, and I cannot imagine why people don't want to flaunt it if they take the trouble of being members.
I could give you one reason. Editors are afraid that if they publish the press council in their papers, they will get more complaints. Like you, we have the agreement of all the newspapers to run our logo and contact details in the papers. Sometimes it's there, sometimes it's not. It is forgotten, it is dropped. So we are conducting a continual campaign with all our member publications to include it not on a daily basis in the sense that somebody has to make a positive decision to put it in, but as part of the template of a particular page, so it goes in automatically every day. But there is, I think, a little reluctance still among editors, because they feel it will only generate more complaints.
Yes. In Sweden, we have the same system. We have the same system that it's we recommend the newspapers to publish our contact information, and I would say most of them do, but some don't, and we have, as I said previously, we have no way of forcing.
I'm Daphne Koenen, the Secretary of the Netherlands Press Council, and I would like to add to the discussion that we do something different than like in Sweden. In the Netherlands you can address your complaint to an individual journalist, and we decide on complaints as long as it is about their job, what they're doing. So for instance, when they put on their Twitter account a connection to their work as a journalist, we can deal with the complaint. Of course, we believe that journalists have some private lives and that we do not deal with this part of their life, but as long as it's about their profession, we deal with the complaint. Another thing in the discussion in the Netherlands is now, and I'm very interested in what the Israeli guy said, I'm sorry, I forgot your name, about that we can see journalism as a civic art and it's about journalistic product. That within the Press Council, actually we believe we should be more competent when it goes, when it's about bloggers giving news to the public. We see it from the public side. How do they read things online, and how is their vision about news? It's not only from a traditional media outlet, but they can see some information on the internet as being news from someone else as well. However, one of our founding fathers is the Netherlands Union of Journalists, and they voted against the decision within the council to be more competent because they think it's an attack on the professional journalists to expand the competence of the press council to this kind of products. So that is the discussion in the Netherlands.
I think, David Hunt, UK, I think this has been a really valuable discussion. Now looking forward, the new body in the UK has sitting round the table the Huffington Post and a number of bloggers, if I can collectively refer to them as that, who are really discussing seriously signing up to the new body because it has a badge of respectability, particularly on accuracy. And if the editor's code, to which we subscribe, independently monitored and enforced, can be accepted as a badge of respectability, particularly on clause 1, which is accuracy, then I think it will last into the future by getting people who otherwise would not be involved to accept that they have certain standards and reassure the public who are looking into their social media messages, assure the public that those messages are accurate and have the badge to justify and prove that.
Manfred Protzer from the German Press Council. One question to Ms. Schneider. If you miss the protection of the company of a medium, do you feel protected in any way by the Israeli Press Council?
I didn't have the honor to be to get a complaint yet, so it's still to be tested.
You're still young. You're still young.
But I once got a complaint about something that I posted on AIPCE, and actually the person that made the complaint wrote to the editor and not to me. He wrote to the editor, and the editor emailed me and said, "What do you say?" You know, I just, I wrote down my side of the story. AIPCE wrote them back, and nothing happened. So I had my share of complaints from readers in the past, but I always deal with it. If I'll get the council protection, I don't know, maybe today.
Maybe you'll be the test case.
Maybe. I do think
May I
that
precise my question at this point? To get a complaint is not the same as to be not protected. Probably the form to handle criticism to your work of the way of self-regulation may be the best protection you can get. So the question again is it in your mind kind of protection as a freelancer as you are? To have a system, to have a form of non-judicial regulated critic against your work. This is another case, because it is not a synonym to get a complaint and to be not protected.
Maybe you should answer that.
I guess we'll have to wait for the case to come. We don't know. I mean, I assume that if we thought a state authority were trying to harm her rights by arguing that she's just an ordinary Joe and not a journalist, we might certainly have something to say about it. But if a complaint came against something she wrote, we may well, certainly if it was carried on a platform like AIPCE, we may decide that we can look into it. Certainly.
The question is, if I put something on Facebook and it's defamative or it's wrong, and someone will, I suppose this is the question. If it's not in AIPCE, it's just, and for the question that came up before with the defamation between my Twitter account and my personal life, I don't have such, I have so many followers on Facebook and on Twitter because I'm a journalist and I'm a newsmaker, and not just an opinionator but really factual newsmaker, and with stories that are breaking. So, and my stories. So the reason that people are following me is because everything I put out there should be, to my opinion, part of my job and not part of my personal life. So even if it's private, it's a bit private, I choose to put it there because I think it's part of the good story. So if I get a complaint on my Twitter account, it's up to you, but I really do not see a difference. It's just up to them with the resources. Do they have the time to deal with all of us?
Well, that's it. I mean, I think we've been asking whether we should, instead of concentrating on who's a journalist, we should ask what is journalism. If we think that what she does is journalism, then it should be applicable. But this is new virgin territory we've not gone into yet.
I offer another, perhaps, point of view. When we were talking before this panel, you told me, okay, if somebody complains against me, or somebody even sues me or takes me to court, I am going to go back to the crowd, to my followers on Twitter and to my friends on Facebook, and I'm going to ask for their help. I did not need the press council's help, but rather I'm going to ask them for funding, and they're helping me, for instance, with a slap suit or something like that. So that's another way to look at things in this new world.
It's already happened in Israel. It's already happened in Israel where a blogger got lawsuit, and he went to the crowd and got money.
Yes,
it's happened twice.
And not only that, it happened once when a blogger was taken to a police investigation, and you wrote that, an anonymous blogger, and you wrote that on Facebook, and a whole public, a sphere came for his help. So I promise to finish on time. I just want to say one more word, perhaps. I think that in this a new digital world, the discussion about the need for special media laws or ethical rules in it is inevitable. However, journalists should be recognizing that their ability to do their job depends less on defining a separate realm of ethics in which they operate, and more on finding ways to ensure that freedom of expression is broadly defended and preserved for journalists and for non-journalists alike. If we're talking about phone hacking, I think we all know today that we are being hacked at every single minute, so that would be another question for another panel. So none of this means that journalists are indistinguishable from activists. In fact, the need for professional standards is even greater, precisely because we are awash of information, and informed news consumers rely on media outlets they trust to sort it out for them. But journalists need to understand, perhaps, that seeking to preserve their own privileged position is counterproductive in the current environment. Journalists need to fight to keep open an information space that allows them to operate, and accept that within that space there will be all sorts of others using information for different purposes. It's a messy, it's a vibrant, it's a volatile space full of contradictions and shortcomings, but it's a space that journalists as well as press councils need to defend. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Right, it's now time for our group photo, which should take no more than 10 minutes, and then we'll have a half-an-hour coffee break just outside. So let's go down. We'll be guided by our production team. Thanks.